Every single year, there are players that you are going to want to avoid in fantasy hockey, whether it's aging players, players with inflated shooting percentages, players that no longer have the opportunity that they had the year before because of either players being traded to their team and them losing their roles, or them being traded to another team. All of these things are important to consider. This is why I'm going to give you 5 players you should absolutely be avoiding on draft day. So be sure to watch this video, guys. Let's get right into it. And we're going to start things off with Brad Marchand of the Boston Bruins. Marchand finished last season with 29 goals, 39 assists for 67 points, 207 shots, and 115 hits. Overall, a very solid year out of Marchand. But he's just not the over-appointed game player or even a pointed game player that he once was. His point per game average has declined in 3 consecutive seasons. Last year was only the 3rd time in his career that he's played over 77 games. He always seems to play around that 70 game mark. He's going to be 36 next year. And the cherry on top with Marchand is he had 3 surgeries this offseason. 3. I think he's an absolute must avoid this year. I will not be touching him in drafts because of this, especially with his current ADP of being around 57, which is in that 3rd round. There's just better players, safer players, players with more upside that I believe are available or are just much safer picks going forward. Marchand just is not in the prime that he once was, and that's why I think he is an absolute must avoid. Up next is Brock Boeser. Boeser finally showed off his scoring talent last year, putting up 40 goals and 73 points in 81 games. Real issue for me with Boeser is that his shooting percentage jumped to 19.6. That's over a 9% increase from last season and an 8% increase from the year before. This is also the first time in Boeser's career that he has scored more than 30 goals in a season. Boeser is definitely a talented scorer, don't get me wrong, and I think he has it in him to score 30 again, but if he does or doesn't, regardless of the fact, his shot volume is constantly on the lower end with an 8.1 shots per 60. That makes him hover around that 200 shot mark, which would be great, but unfortunately he also misses around double-digit games every single season. I'm not convinced he's going to shoot around 19% next year. And if that's the case, he's just a 25 goal, 55 point guy. He doesn't really have those incredibly high point totals, and he doesn't really have extra peripherals like in the hits and blocks categories to go along with the fact that, you know, he's not a great volume shooter on top of that. And so for a guy that's really had one successful year in terms of being elite over the course of his entire career, pretty much, I just don't have any confidence in a player like that, and I'm looking to draft elsewhere, especially around his ADP at 62. I can already hear everyone screaming in the comments, Chris, why do you have Sam Reinhart on this list when he put up 57 goals and 94 points last season and has consistently been around a 30-goal guy in his career? And to that, I would say you're right. Absolutely, no questions asked. I'm arguing with stats at that point. Reinhart is still a good player in fantasy hockey. I don't think he's bad. I don't think he should be like a do not draft player. But let me tell you why I think you should avoid him in drafts this season. First of all, his ADP is currently at 21. This puts him ahead of some of the elite defensemen in the National Hockey League and in fantasy hockey, in Quinn Hughes, Evan Bouchard, and Roman Josi. But he's also listed ahead of some, in my opinion, much better forwards, like Jason Robertson, Braden Point, Mitch Marner, Sebastian Aho. These are all guys that I'm taking well before I even look at taking Sam Reinhart. We have him projected currently for 86 points on the season. I think that's a little bit high, especially with the inflation around his recent point total, especially the 43 goals. Last year with a shooting percentage of 24.5%. That's insane. With his 2 prior seasons being at 13 and 17%, and his career average is around 13% as well. So that just shows you how big of a jump Reinhart took. He also led the National Hockey League with 27 power play goals. His 2 prior seasons, he was around 16. Now, Reinhart has obviously a super inflated shooting percentage. Where have I seen this before? Last year, if you look back, Ryan Nugent-Hopkins had an insane goal rate out of nowhere close to his career averages, and a crazy high shooting percentage that was almost basically triple what his career average is. I think Reinhart's in a very similar position. I obviously like Sam Reinhart as a player and as a fantasy hockey asset. I just think the position that he's going in drafts and where his ADP is just not where you should be taking him. That's why I'm avoiding him, and I'm going with some much safer options or players that have more upside, whether it's an elite defenseman or whether it's one of those elite forwards that I mentioned. I would much rather have all those players before Sam Reinhart. Up next is Tristan Jarry, and I know his ADP, you can get him a little bit later in drafts this year, and I could understand the value of snagging him up if you're going with the 0G goalie strategy. But I'm staying away from him, and I think you should as well, and here's why. Since the trade deadline, Jarry only started 10 times, posting a 2-7-1 record with an .869 save percentage and had a 3.7 goals against average. During that span, Alex Nedeljkovic played 15 times since the deadline, had a 9-3-3 record, including an 11-game span where he went 8-0-3 without a regulation loss. Look, I think Pittsburgh is going to be bad next year, like really bad. After losing both Jake Gensel and Riley Smith, they have a lot of scoring that they need to just suddenly appear out of nowhere. And not only on top of that, but I think Jarry is going to lose some of his volume as a starter. I no longer think that he's just the go-to guy in Pittsburgh. I think with the Alex Nedeljkovic extension, them giving him a 2-year extension shows that they are planning on having that guy in the system. And this is all just outside of the fact that Jarry hasn't exactly been good lately either. He's only been above a .910 save percentage once in the last 4 seasons. And I think if the Penguins end up being a bottom of the table team, you're going to wish that you avoided this guy and just went with somebody that either gets you full-time starter volume or is just a better overall goalie. And I truly think that Jarry should be in a void for most teams this year. I'm not confident in the Penguins at all, and that's why I'm avoiding Tristan Jarry. Unfortunately, I don't see Jonathan Huberdeau getting back to those elite numbers that we saw in Florida after this being the second consecutive year where he's underperformed, with his point per game slipping to around 0.65 points per game, far from his 1.5 that he posted earlier in his elite years in Florida. His advanced metrics, like his primary assists per 60, declined from 1.25 to 0.75 this last season. This just shows that he is no longer driving play at 5-on-5 like he once did. His time on ice is also down, and Calgary looks like they're going to try to rely on more younger players in key situations and further up into their lineup. I think this is all signs pointing to abandon ship with Jonathan Huberdeau. It's unfortunate that he hasn't been able to find his game. There aren't a lot of targets for him to find in Calgary on top of that. Like we saw, Yegor Sharangovich he scored 30 goals last year. That just came out of nowhere. We saw Nazem Kadri have a really good year, and he's consistently in that upper 20s goal scoring totals. But I think with Huberdeau is he lacks talent around him, and he lacks driving play at 5-on-5 now. He's no longer in the prime of his career. Either the way the offense is run in Calgary going forward is just not where it needs to be. Now, Calgary has since changed up their coaching staff, so maybe there is a little bit going forward with Huberdeau. But even in the last 20 games of the season, Huberdeau was below half a point a game. It's just, it's really sad to see, honestly, because he was once one of the better premier playmakers in the National Hockey League. But unfortunately, Huberdeau is going to be a must avoid for me going into this season. That's going to do it for this video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Leave a comment down below who you think is a player that should be a must avoid player going into next season. Again, I just want to touch on the fact that these guys do not draft players by any means. These are just players that I'm personally avoiding given their statistical anomalies, or the fact that they're just rapidly declining in terms of production or age, or just lack opportunity going forward. So again, love to hear your guys' thoughts in the comments. As always, let me know what you think of the video. I'll see you in the next one. Have yourselves a fantastic rest of the day.